This is a production of Cornell University.
Thanks everyone for coming to the second episode of the Cornell Turf Show this year. Yesterday was our first episode on Thursday, where we had a golf turf focused webinar. On Fridays here for our live audience at 10 a.m. We'll be doing a half an hour webinar, and we'll be alternating every Friday between sports turf and lawn turf. So this week is our sports turf episode. Every week we'll kind of start with Frank Rossi. Will start us off with some timely updates on the growing season, and then we'll transition into an introduction for our guest. This week we're talking about sports fields, and our guest is Chris Sitko, former graduate student here at Cornell, and currently works at the Martha's Vineyard, the Vineyard Club golf course out there, organic golf course on the Vineyard, but had a lot of experience with sports field monitoring, safety, while at Cornell, doing many things as a graduate student. So we're excited to get to Chris in our conversation a little bit. But Frank, if you want to start us off, what are we looking at here early in the season?
Well, we're looking at 24 minutes to be the fastest 30 minutes in turf, Carl. So I'm going to get right to it, brother, and just use this picture to demonstrate sort of what a lot of guys are hearing. With the pent up demand and opening back up of society, I can tell you personally, I did some traveling across the country this past week, and I can tell you that the rest of the world, or the rest of this country, is opening up rapidly, and that's going to play out in the use of our sports fields moving forward. And so just to remind you, we started these things last year as a way of dealing with my anxiety, I think, and partially because we wanted to find ways to support you guys out there in the field. While things were very unsure, we were able to contribute with some education. It went over pretty well. And so we're returning again for a 10-week run this spring, and we'll do this with you sports folks every other week. So again, let me start out with the way we ended last year. The way we were doing it last year is we want to keep you safe. We want to make sure your workers are safe. And of course, there's all kinds of protocols in place that'll probably stay in place even after we're all vaccinated. You can imagine some of the cleaning and disinfecting things will probably continue. You wonder how this, it came up quickly. You wonder how it's going to go away and how we're going to return to interacting with each other. But certainly in the workplace, we're going to face some challenges there. But the bigger safety question that we're going to take up with my colleague, the environmental asset and research manager out at the Vineyard Golf Club is, are your athletes playing on a safe field, right? Is that what your field is looking like coming out of the winter? That would be bad, considering that most people didn't have their fields used much last year. A lot of the activities that are used for active field use, active recreation, organized sports, round ball sports, baseball, things like that, was pretty much closed to a lot of people during the pandemic and for a lot of the year. And if it was used, it wasn't used that intensively. And so, I'll take a picture back that we had from last year, and boy, you probably, if you took advantage last year, you should have as dense and a turf cover that you've ever had. If you were able to get the resources out there in a timely fashion without traffic, I'm wondering if people created any thatch problems, because obviously excessive nitrogen without much wear could lead to thatch. But at the same time, I'm staring down the barrel of what a lot of people are. People are out there using their fields. So this is the text message I got from the soccer coach just yesterday at Cornell, and McGovern is the training grounds that our Cornell soccer team plays on. So, I received this question because we've been involved with the soccer program, and Chris has been intimately involved with that while he was here at Cornell, and is going to talk a little bit about some of the things we learned while he was here. And I'll just start out, as Carl said, talking about the weather. It was a warmer than normal winter. I don't think not everybody felt that. But it certainly was warmer than normal throughout the northeastern United States, with very few cooler than normal periods if you just take the December to February period. Now, snowfall was a little bit different. We had a good amount of snowfall in December. January was record dry, And February again brought a fair amount of snowfall across the United States as well as in the Northeast, and a lot of it fell to the east. A lot of the snowfall fell to the east of the region, not so much even where we are up here. Now you look at our current soil temperatures, right? We're going to govern our ability to grow and put up with traffic by how much the system is functioning. Well, the system is barely functioning, if at all. I mean, you're barely creeping into the 50s at the 2-inch soil, at the 2-inch depth. Now, that's not to say you can't get warmer at the surface, but certainly what you might start the year out with is light surface rolling, before they get out there. Maybe put a light roll on the fields. You obviously want to watch out for compaction, but there probably was some heaving and frost that occurred through the winter time. And, if you're on a top dressing program, this certainly will go very well, but certainly light rolling, I'm not suggesting, you take the 10-ton vibratory street roller out there, but just a light firming of the surface could be useful because, obviously these are the kinds of conditions that we're trying to avoid occurring. If you start to use these fields under conditions at the top where they're still a little wet and even maybe frozen, you can really wear out the surface, particularly as the soil itself might be prone to compaction. Now, as we look to the current conditions, right, our normal March, up until 10 years ago, our normal average March temperatures, you can see are still fairly cool. This is average temperature. Now, that's not to say it doesn't get warmer than this and that you can't creep into the 50s and 60s like we just did for the last few days. But just a reminder that in general, the temperatures are cooler. And I think up here in upstate New York, we're going to be in the teens again relatively quickly. Now, what does this mean for how grass grows? It generally means that, well, you might have a few days where the potential for growth is at 80%, right? The potential for growth, not that it actually grows that much, but because of temperature, which is driving the photosynthetic apparatus, and if you're getting light to the surface, you have the potential to grow. Now, if you'll grow is a different story. But in the next few weeks, if we start to get to our average temperatures, we're going to be at about 20% potential growth. So even if it was growing as much as it could, it would only be about 20% of optimum growth, which again, if you're putting traffic on it, is going to be quite a problem. Now, Chris is going to talk a lot more about this in a second, but certainly covers and darkening agents that warm the soil, stimulate some growth and recovery can be very useful at these times. Targeting areas with tarps, permeable or permeable preferably, to let light and water through can really accelerate that growth in an area where you might otherwise still be dormant and not ready to take on so much growth. So the question for us for the rest of the time today is, are your athletes playing on a safe field? Just before I, introduce Chris, we have one of still the best websites available that my colleague, Joanne Grudadorio, led many years ago in developing. Is still one of the few that's as comprehensively focused on producing safe sports fields, and it's in desperate need of an update. So we're hoping that over the next several years, we'll be able to get some updated information here. But obviously investing in safe sports fields, as we talked about last year during the pandemic, communication's a very important part of that. So what do you want to tell the people, the coaches and athletic directors who are texting you and pressing you to get out onto those fields? Now, in an ideal world where we weren't living in the middle of a pandemic, right, we could have a reasonable conversation on the impact of overuse on field quality and safety, right? Now, if you're an athletic director and a coach, they want good fields and fit in all their practice and games. And, they want to keep their schedule. And now kids, mental health is saying, we got to get these kids outside. We got to get these kids active, especially at the youth level. But everybody wants to be out, and organized sports has been such an important component of many of these people's interaction with the natural world. It's some of the only time they get outside is to do these things. But it does have a cost at this time of the year. And I'm not saying don't let them use it. I'm just saying make sure you have a conversation with them about it and try to keep it safe. So on the sports Field website, you'll see these calendars that Joanne developed many years ago to look at. Here's a spring and fall sports with minimal management. We did low, medium, and high budgets. We did spring, fall, and year-round use. And I just pulled out a couple here. And you can see, if you're under a minimal management condition, right? We're already telling you to start seeding perennial ryegrass. If you can't cultivate, if you can't top dress, this increases the likelihood of injury and excessive surface hardness. So if you look at a year-round management plan with, high-end management, look at what we're saying. Monitor rooting depth, solid tine cultivation, lightly roll, seed perennial rye. So there's a lot of things. If you're able to get the resources to get your sports fields going, whether it's covering or doing these other things, I think it's critical to start having those conversations. Now, Chris, as I transfer to you and introduce you, you had some really hands-on experience interacting both with the natural surfaces here and the synthetic surfaces as we've carved out this partnership with Cornell Athletics. So thanks for that. Congratulations on your new gig, and congratulations on your pending marriage, which was just announced. Everybody, it's on the front page of the paper now in the Vineyard, right? News is slow out there. Let's talk a little bit as we enter into this. When I asked the question safe, I know you've got a few slides you want to show. Why don't you start with that number 2 slide? When we say safe, there's actually a way we can quantify it. So why don't you start talking about the way you approach this as we've approached it from a data perspective?
Yeah, Carl and Frank, first, thanks for having me on. Always great to chat about grass. And let me see if I can get my hands up here.
Even though you're in the golf business now.
That's right. Yeah, we'll jump to number 2. Yeah, and I think it's just one aspect of everything that has become data-driven across the board for managing fields, whether it's your fertility or, the varieties you're stitching in or even calculating field use. I think there's a lot of beneficial data that needs to be incorporated in how we manage and how we use the fields. But the two we focused on, and I think, it's probably the 2 most popular, or easy, I'd say maybe easiest to gather is the surface hardness, which you've mentioned a few times already. And then, so that would be the Clegg device, the red device on the left. And that's essentially, you're dropping a missile and it's measuring like how far it's penetrating that surface. So with the Clegg, you're using multiple drops, and then it's the 3rd drop that you're actually using the number for. The second device is the Toma shear from Turf Tech. This is actually what we started with, but we've moved on to their shear vane. But essentially what you're trying to measure is traction, the shear resistance of that surface. And, one aspect that I think we've talked about a lot in the past, just bringing synthetic into it, natural grass has the ability to divot. You don't necessarily see divots on synthetic turf. I'm not saying, I don't want to get too far into the safety components right off the bat, but, just that surface being able to give you enough traction where you can perform to the level that you need. And that's going to vary a lot, whether you're looking at elementary school level kids or, what we did at Cornell with, Division I athletes. So, and then lastly, the picture in the background, you made a great point, which I didn't really think about. If you didn't have use in the fall, I hope everybody's coming out of winter, if you were buried in snow, maybe hopefully you don't have too many disease issues, but hopefully we have a dense surface. And I think that's the key to, safety. We can take all the values we want, but I think the number one thing that you have to focus on is just keeping a dense turf, which is going to, provide that interface between the player and the soil. And you already brought up the Cornell Turf website, but this is right off that Safe Sports Fields website. And this is, we're talking about soil. So in the spring, I think most people are going to have saturated conditions. So knowing your soil type on your fields, whether they were constructed with native soil or, maybe you had the sort of benefit of having a sand-based system, is gonna mean a lot to, to your point, if the coach is asking, can I get out there? Well, if there's puddles, the quickest answer is no. But understanding why you might have puddles is another question. And, to your point about communication, you have to communicate with the stakeholders, often who aren't the grass growers, so nobody likes to spend money and bury it in the ground, but, good drainage is critical to having a safe field. And then just moving on, what can you do, or, over time, especially to, amend that surface or, make it playable during these, early spring where Mother Nature isn't friendly. So top dressing, sand top dressing is a popular management practice, but understand what it's doing, and be sure if you are doing it and spending that money and investing in sand, make sure your stakeholders understand. So if you've been on a top dressing program and you've accumulated, let's say, a couple inches at the surface, take a core, take a picture. The field down the road might not have this, but and it might not be usable. So make sure you highlight these investments you've made over time. And you already brought up the rolling, Frank, but I think it's it's kind of a do no harm time. I think everybody's biting at the bit to get out there and do something, but understanding your soils, especially if you have a native clay, you got to be careful getting out there with a roller to avoid too much compaction. And you had already brought up the covers. I think you already showed the next picture, but at Cornell, this was actually in the fall, so we were trying to extend our growing season versus start it up early, but we just focused on the heavy use areas. So we're looking at the goldmouth, and I think we had maybe 2 more games after this. Mm-hmm. So one note with the covers, we were blessed. So Cornell has a separate game field, so we were able to get the tarp out, and we left it down for almost an entire week. So if you have a field that is practice and games and it's used every day, you might not quite have the flexibility to use these types of tools to kind of get that growth to either continue later.
But a dark top dressing will work, right? A dark top dressing will also work there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I'm on Twitter and follow all the golf guys now, but folks like in the Mountain West, they're top dressing with black sand, dark
black sand all the time.
And it heats the surface. Anything to heat that surface and kind of accelerate the system. But yeah, so this is the post cover for after just a week. You're seeing that difference in the color. Maybe we had a little bit of growth. We didn't measure clippings or anything, but I would assume that we had a little bit more growth, especially if you're putting seed down. You might get a little more germination in colder temps. Mm-hmm. This is just so we buried soil thermochron temperature loggers, and this is just a graph of what was under that cover. So this was second half of October, and it might not look like much. So the blue line is for that. I don't know if everybody's if people just have audio or if they're tuning in on the screen, but so what we did, we measured the soil temperature at 2-inch depth. And this is just under the cover, and then we put one in the ground at the same depth, not under a cover. And right off the bat, there's hardly any difference, but you see towards the end of that 7-day period, a few degrees here and there. And, it's one thing that you look back, it's like, oh, I wish we would have put one at 1 inch or maybe one at the surface. Because then I think, we'd really start to see these larger differences that, might give you a little bit better inclination than just a dark green picture. Because, I think at the biggest difference, we might have a 5-degree difference, but we're at 2-inch soil depth. That I think that means something. So at the surface, you're going to have a much larger difference. And then we can't forget about synthetics. Your first picture was awesome. Guys on the field. So and I that last year I was there. The Cornell guys, I think they plowed Sholkoff 20 times. But if you are plowing your synthetic surfaces to try to open them up, make sure you're doing that in a careful manner. You could be possibly moving that infill around. And I think the easiest way to check is, oftentimes in the snow piles, we'd see your infill, whether it's the black chrome rubber or, a little bit of sand. So, that could be your first indication that you got to get out there and check the infill depth. Because, when we're thinking about, shear resistance and back to the hardness on these surfaces, at least on the synthetics, I think, having that desired infill depth is absolutely key to having consistent, the consistent readings and the safe readings.
And I think, just to reinforce that, Chris, that infill depth is a relatively easy thing to measure that tells you a lot about safety. Once Andy McNitt and the Penn State guys did that work showing the value of the volume of infill is changing everything. I think, that's what we're always looking for an easy way to take this data. If you can't afford the Clegg, you don't want to look at rotational traction and, what do they actually mean? They mean more to you as a manager. Obviously, you don't want the kid's head to crack open on it. So let's get to the hardness of these things moving forward.
Yeah, no, and I mean, we got ours. It was Chenango Contracting was out, servicing the field, and we were just talking with them, and they threw us the little. I wish I had a picture. It's a little device. It just sinks down into that carpet, and it gives you the infill depth. I mean, it's real easy. 5 minutes, you walk around, take a couple spots. I would like you to, I would think, maybe focus on if you are using the fields, or maybe the last team to use the field. So Cornell's baseball field it has a synthetic surface, and we see right around the bases where folks are sliding. I don't know if everybody can see my cursor, but kind of back here you almost see all that info right at the surface, whereas near the base you're almost down to the mat underneath. So that just, even you can do this with a broom too. I don't think you need anything fancy. It's just a matter of you have a little infill or brushing this back to where it needs to go. Same thing with the lacrosse goal mount. So to your point, you don't need fancy equipment, a little bit of time, cheap measuring device, maybe, but it's, one aspect that, synthetic turf, it still needs maintenance, even coming out of winter and, getting ready for a season. Oh, Carl, sorry, I just saw your poll. But let me see if
I think it was good, Chris, as we were talking about, less expensive ways to measure field safety. We talk about the Clegg and the traction device, and those can be a little bit expensive for certain people. Just asking people if they take measures of field safety. So it looks like about 2/3 do, a third don't. But I think that just reinforces your point. There's some easy, cheap ways you can go out and
I'll hustle up because I know we're getting short on time.
No. But I want to say this because I think what you're doing as you wrap up here, and I'll tie it up at the end. This would be a good place. It's unusual. Number one, I'm in any audience of sports turf managers where any more than 10% of them actually take field measures. So we've got a unique collection of high-end people measuring those things here. Number two, and I think, Chris, you've done it well here, is you have people's attention focused on the fields. You had to plow them off. They're active to get out there. The way you can talk to them about the soils, say, yeah, we got this problem now, and you see it. How about we fix it moving forward? We can go ahead and use it. We'll do, whatever's got to be done. Maybe even you take a field and sacrifice it. But in the future, you've got their attention. How do you communicate it to them moving forward? So that's where I want to reinforce what you said. Now get us through this real big safety concern.
Yeah. So this is, this was from 2019, and, it was one of those things. It's like the lacrosse teams are using the field, and, we ask you, Frank, well, should we be testing? He's like, of course. You're like, yeah, if they're using it, we're testing it. So this is, mid-February to mid-March, which, we're towards the tail end of this, but, this is very relevant. And it's, I think the temperatures were much colder than, maybe you're getting now. But so the blue line is tracking just average daily temperature. And then the precipitation is on the right vertical axis. And then the bold numbers at the top are our Clegg, or our surface hardness measurements. Just for reference, the NFL sets a threshold at 100, for that field to be, safe and playable. So right off the bat, we get out there and we get a 152. It's like, holy smokes. And, we walk over to the asphalt around it. It's like 58. It's like, oh my goodness, it's frozen solid. And I think all of us, it's like, well, the reason they're on the synthetic turf is because you can use it all year. And I don't think you need necessarily a Clegg to, that surface was rock hard.
You could take the whole coach's head and bang his head on it and see if it's hard enough.
And it's something, it's one of those complaints. Everybody complains about all the infill getting in their kids' socks and shoes. And, if you take your hand and just rub the surface, you can see it kind of scatter. Well, in this scenario, when it was frozen, nothing was moving. It was locked up. But then you look at 2 days later, we get a surge in temperature, a little bit of, rain. That system thaws out. We're right back down to 100. So the variability in this is pretty drastic. And then, even further down the month, we're back, huge, this is average temperature. So if we're down near 10, the low for that was, probably 0. So, and again, maybe moisture plays into it. If you have a little bit of precipitation and then you have a real drastic drop in temperature, even a synthetic field can freeze, which is something I never considered. I don't think any of us really considered it. I always thought they were, all season long. So just, be cautious, even on a synthetic field, just go out there, rub your hand. I think that would be the easiest thing if you don't have a way of measuring how it feels underfoot. Bounce a ball, I think there's a lot of, just less, fancy ways to determine this, how hard that field might be.
Perfect. You good?
I'll just end with this slide. It's been a long winter, work the kinks out. Whether it's mowing a straight line or painting a straight line.
Oh God.
Brings the time to work the kinks out.
I just love when this happens at Cornell, where we're supposed to know what we're doing, right? I think it's a measure of, every operation has its challenges. And for us, like I'm already staring at another text from the coach clarifying exactly how they can use the field. So listen, Chris, thanks for taking the time. Carl, we're pretty close to the witching hour here, brother. I think what we want to do is promote a continued conversation. So maybe if people have additional questions about this or other things, we can start off the show next week with taking some questions and some comments, and have Chris back at some point too, to continue to inform folks about this. Chris, thanks for taking the time to join us. Carl, you ready to get us out of here?
Yeah, thanks again, Chris. And Frank, like you're saying, questions, we got our live attendees and we got some questions through the Q&A. But if you're watching either on YouTube after the fact or podcast and you got a question either about this week's episode or maybe for our future guests, just send us an email. You can send me an email, css223@cornell.edu if you've got any questions, or you can reach us on Twitter too. That's a great place to throw us a link for any questions. Thanks everyone for joining us for episode 2, 2021 season, the Cornell Turf Show. Fastest 30 minutes in turf, maybe slightly more today. Sometimes we have technical difficulties. I'm a millennial, but I'm not immune to the digital difficulties. So thanks everyone, again, the live attendees, and hope we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. See you guys. See you, Chris.
See you. Take care.
See you guys.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.